issues.
Okay, Chair Coburn, we are now live. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Clerk Drury. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see everyone on such a beautiful spring-like day for a change. And so we'll call the meeting to order. And I guess wait until our CAO can join us, hopefully momentarily. Just taking a look at the agenda, are there any revisions or additions to the agenda that anyone has noticed or would like to bring forward? Anne?
Yes, I would like to bring forward the fact that the Georgian Bluffs Climate Action Team is hosting a presentation in May on Lyme disease and climate change connection. And we are struggling with finding a host that will allow the number of people that we're hoping to attract, and wondered whether the Georgian Bluffs Climate Action Committee might be interested in partnering to do that.
Okay, let's put that in under new business as item 12.1.2, if that's okay with you, Brittany. And then I would just ask for someone to move that the agenda, if there are no other additions, that the agenda be approved with that one addition under new business. And Danuta, thank you. And all in favor? And so that carries. Thank you. Just our usual reminder regarding declaring a pecuniary interest either now or at any point in time during the meeting. And then moving on to item number 4, the minutes of the previous meeting of March 12th are in the agenda package, and so I'm assuming everyone had a chance to review those. There's a recommendation before us that those minutes be approved, and do I have someone to put that motion on the floor? Thank you, Luke. Seconded by Bob. Welcome, CAO Meneses. Nice to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Any discussion regarding those minutes? Does anyone, has anyone noticed anything? John, go ahead, please.
There we go. Yeah, I just had a question on the minutes regarding the work plan, and embedded in that now are a series of milestones, I guess we'll call them, that are highlighted in orange. And I was just curious to know the degree to which some of these have been finalized or not. Like the first one, the committee established, well, clearly it was, and then as we go down in that list, we hear that there's a commitment to get reduction targets and so on. And I wonder if, for clarification, like milestone 35 is local climate action plan developed, and I didn't know that we've actually done that. So I wonder if we could put some dates on this or some status to know where we are in that process.
Okay, I think that's a great topic for discussion. I wonder if we're okay with approving the work plan as it's part of the minutes that we're about to approve. I wonder, John, if it would be okay if we discuss that further when Luke gives us the update under that particular item in terms of timelines.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted clarification.
Perfect. Yeah, I see what you mean. There aren't dates associated with that, as far as I can see, with that particular document. So let's talk about how we can perhaps incorporate that into the work plan going forward. Thank you. Any other comments regarding the minutes from March 12th? Okay, so now I'm a little lost. Brittany, did I get a mover and a seconder to accept those? Okay, all in favor of adopting the minutes, and that carries as well. Thank you. Unless Brittany has some indication otherwise. I don't see anything under public hearings, presentations, delegations, correspondence, or staff reports. Moving right along. Look at us go. Unfinished business. So, and nothing under public question period, Brittany. Got it. Thank you. Unfinished business committee work plan, the updated version, as well as the appendix to that work plan. Is it you, Luke, who would like to make comment on the updated version and how that's different? And we can also have a discussion about John's recommendation.
Yeah, no, it's actually quite interesting, John, you mentioned it, because the previous versions actually had a time frame, but we never talked about it. So I actually took it out because I thought if we don't put a time, if there's no, it felt a bit empty without having a commitment to timelines. So yeah, happy to put that back in again. I think it's a good point. And I think what would be nice is maybe to have a review. Maybe we can take it offline and put forward a revised work plan in the next week or so. The only changes that were made with regards to this version of the work plan compared to the previous one is regarding the status. So I basically updated the status, but there's no changes with regards to actions or activities as part of this. So you see where we're at, and if the order needs to be reversed, then I think that would be wonderful to do that in order to keep it fresh and to really kind of keep it going as a live document. And what you will have seen as well is in the previous versions, I included, for example, there is, and I probably should change the numbering, but I also try to include the activities that were originally not part of the work plan, but have become part of the process. For example, in the last meeting that we got an update from Joran Kinlos to basically use the work plan both forward-looking, but also kind of documents the history of the process, so that at the end of the day, hopefully this could be of use for other municipalities that go through a similar process. So concretely, I don't know, Chair, if you want to go and address some of the changes that need to be made now, or alternatively that we take this offline and that John and I take a hard look at the sequence and that we propose revised and that we basically change and update the work plan accordingly for next meeting.
So yeah, thank you. I think we can probably do both. I would ask council now if they have reviewed the work plan and have any recommendations for changes other than what John has indicated in terms of timelines. I would like, if it's okay with the group, to give folks an opportunity to speak to that now, and then perhaps take it offline and work on the newest revision based on what some of you on the committee have to contribute to that. So does that make sense? Does anyone have any suggestions at this point in time for that work plan or revisions? I imagine there'll be an addition when we get to talking about Anne's item under new business, but that's already on your radar. I don't see any hands going up at the moment, Luke, so we'll let you take that project away as you've been doing all along, and we appreciate you being the keeper of that living document.
Right, and then John, I'll reach out to you and we'll take it offline and then integrate your suggestions and highlight them for the committee for next meeting. Yeah.
Okay, and I see Anne has her hand up. Take it away, Anne. Yeah, I think you're on mute, Anne. Sorry. It wouldn't be a virtual meeting if we didn't say that at least once.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Don't know whether this is a work plan related question, but I'm really curious. I know that council has had their budget meeting which, I mean, I think all of the council members and staff deserve a medal for being part of such a long meeting. But what I wondered about is, do the council members that are on the committee and staff members have an update in terms of when will budget likely be approved, so we know when some of these actions can move forward?
My bad. Al, would you like to address that for us, please?
Sure. Right now, we're looking at likely a May council approval timeline, and the reason for that is the following. On April 20th, we're going to have a special council meeting specifically related to the airport feasibility study, and that's an important input that council needs to hear before they make a final decision on the 2021 budget. On April 21st, we're also going to have a council meeting where we have some consultants presenting their recommendations in regards to an organizational review that they are presenting, and those are going to have some budgetary implications as well. So we thought it was important that council hear the sort of recommendations coming out of both of those reports before they make an ultimate decision on the budget. We've also got a biodigester feasibility study happening as well. That's likely not going to line up, but I don't think it's going to be as sort of controversial as the other two are going to be. And I will share something with you that I think is important for this committee to hear is the organizational review consultants. I've seen a draft preview, and they are recommending that council consider hiring a contract resource to move the environment and climate file forward, so we have a dedicated resource. So that's something under consideration that council will also be deliberating over and above the $50,000 ask that's there for climate action. The consultant's report is recommending that we consider hiring a contract role specifically dedicated to the climate file. It'll either be a 12-month or a 24-month contract. I don't know at the end of the day what it's going to look like, but in other words, it'll be a term and task. Someone get hired, move this along, set the roadmap, really get us in solid footing to move us forward, and then they're done. They're not suggesting it be a full-time role for now. What they're suggesting is it's a contract role, lay out the roadmap, and then move it from there. So that's important. And I will tell you, while I've got the floor, as I just finished a CAO's meeting as well this morning, and the county is in the final stages of hiring a climate change coordinator, and the county CAO has guaranteed that and committed that climate coordinator will also be available to help the lower tiers move certain things forward and really helping in the coordination of all of our efforts. So I can tell you that it is high on the agenda for all of the CAOs in terms of climate action, and so it's very optimistic in terms of what I'm hearing and seeing. So just wanted to share that with the committee.
Thank you, Al. That's positive news, and we're happy to hear it, I'm sure. Can I ask one question, if you don't mind, in regards to both the position that the county is considering, the climate change coordinator, and the one that we're considering for our municipality? Are these folks intended to actually prepare a climate action plan, or are they coordinating the process that will include the hiring of a specialist to develop the climate change plan? Do you have the answer to that question at this time, Al?
Yeah, sure, Councillor. I would say it's the latter. I don't see us deviating from hiring a specialist to create the plan. We're still going to seek funding from the various organizations to help offset the cost, but I see that as a coordination. But typically what happens is when you hire that expert to develop, it sort of becomes a hot potato, and then they drop it on the municipality in terms of implementation. So someone comes, they know, they sort of develop that plan. It then sort of comes down to staff to implement it and figure out how they're going to implement those recommendations. And that's where the contract resource comes in. is in putting that implementation plan together, helping us move forward, looking at that low-hanging fruit to start doing some positive things, start building some momentum, and then put us on a positive footing. So I see it more the latter than the former.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Questions from the floor for Al or anyone else? Anne?
So in terms of the contract position that you're talking about, that the consultants are recommending, Al, is that already then in that budget that was presented to council, or will that be in addition?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's to Anne. It's not in the budget right now. We didn't know at the time when we brought the draft budget forward what some of those recommendations were going to be. Part of what was in the budget was sort of a placeholder where we put a little bit of a plug in there, just considering what we thought some of those recommendations were going to be and what some of those potential costs were going to be. But no, it's going to have some additional. It's going to require some additional tweaking on our part to keep our tax rate as low as we can, and so we're developing some strategies. Should council endorse the recommendations coming from the consultants, then staff will go back and try to tweak the budget and try to find some additional funding and some additional synergies and savings to try to offset that. Our goal is to try to keep the tax increase that was presented, keep it the same. And so if there's some additional costs that will be presented as a result of some of these studies coming forward, we're looking at opportunities to offset those costs wherever possible.
Thank you. Any other questions regarding the budget for climate change for Georgian Bluffs? Oh, sorry, Luke, you have your hand up.
Yes, but I would. It's not related to this issue. I just want to have. I want to circle back to the work plan. Just kind of a question for the committee. It's about the timeline. So if we have a timeline and we put in a timeline, would the committee be comfortable that we put in some tentative dates in terms of quarters, so that you see a revision that is kind of front loaded, and that we kind of would it be okay? So if John and I take a stab at the different at the updated work plan, would we feel okay that we actually put a quarterly update in there, for example, or a monthly update, or a monthly schedule?
How do folks feel about that? I see heads nodding. Any comments? Thumbs up?
Okay.
Sounds like
Good.
that's a goal. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Any other questions for Al at this point in time? Or Sue, Deputy Mayor Carlton, as we know, is on the county council and has some insights that way. Is there anything other than what Al's suggested at the county level, Sue, that you might be able to share with us?
No, I think Al covered that with hiring the coordinator up there and how that will work in with all the lower tier municipalities. So that was kind of the big thing on our last meeting.
Okay, good. Thank you. Bob, over to you.
Yeah, Al, I was just wondering, I'm just curious, what sort of background will these climate action coordinators have? Like, I'm just wondering what are they economists or are they environmental?
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at that. I don't think they're going to be economists. My suspicion is they'll have an environmental engineering background or some sort of background in terms of what we can do. I mean, I think when we start talking about sort of developing that roadmap, you need to have some practical experience in terms of what's doable and not doable based on some of those fiscal challenges we're going to have. But to me, I'm more concerned in terms of really looking at some low-hanging fruit and getting some momentum. I'm a strong believer that you achieve what you measure, and we need to start sort of measuring some of those incremental steps that we want to take, and we need to start demonstrating that the work that we're doing is having the desired effect that we would like. We'd like to be able to measure the successes that we're having as well, so that when we go forward to council in subsequent years, continuing the momentum and continuing to ask for additional funding, we can demonstrate clearly, here's what we've done in the last year, here's the successes that we've had, here's how we've impacted, our carbon footprint, here's how we've done certain things to reduce our energy consumption, and that way at least you can sort of define the successes and continue to move forward. So from a skill set, I'm really thinking it's going to be sort of more of an environmental engineering background to look at some of those things, but I don't know until we get there what it's going to look like.
Okay, thanks.
And Sue, you have your hand up.
I do. I just took a quick look back at the county on the last agenda has a job description laid out there of what all they would be looking for, and probably we would be in much that same kind of level of education and such. So if anybody wants to go back to that April 1st agenda, it gives a full 6-page job description there. The other thing that I forgot to mention is that, if I can find my way back to that, the county is taking part in an electric vehicle charging network initiative with, I think, if I remember correctly, there's a total of 7 municipalities. It's County of Wellington's going to take the lead, the counties of Dufferin, Perth, Huron, and Grey, in addition to Greybury's Health, City of Guelph, and our Energy Guelph. And it's looking at creating a network. We're all each putting in $5,000 and looking to get some funding to match that. The idea is to find out where there currently are charging stations and where are the gaps. Where do we need to fill in? Where do we need to get more put in place? So that was the other thing on that last agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. It's helpful to know what's going on at that level too. Otherwise, I'm sure I wouldn't have heard about that. As far as electric chargers here, I know our former CAO started down that path, but then it didn't sort of get off the ground. So I think that's something that's been certainly considered and likely will be going forward as well. I see that John's put a comment in the chat indicating that Brock University has a Masters of Sustainability program, and that could be a source for hiring for such a contract worker as well. So that's helpful information, John. Thank you. Any other comments or questions at this point in time? Okay, so we will then move on to, sorry, Al, you were finished. You had no more updates for us from the CAO's office?
No, for you, Madam Chair. The only other update I will say as part of our discussions this morning, we did agree we're having difficulty getting some meeting time so that all the CEOs can get together and sort of exploring some of those partnerships and moving the files forward together and looking for some cost savings. And the stay-at-home orders has sort of thrown a little bit more of a curveball for us, but we've all agreed that we're going to meet virtually. So I will likely have an update at the next meeting that we will have met and started to sort of move that discussion and that needle forward for all the CEOs. So I will have an update next month.
Great, that sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, I think we can all appreciate the challenges right now, and thank goodness for all of the wonderful IT solutions that we've been able to put into place. Okay, I guess moving on to new business then. The first item is a discussion regarding the special joint council meeting that we had around climate action, and that took place on March 24th. I imagine we're looking for a bit of a debrief, how folks felt that went, and if there's any ensuing steps that we ought to be taking from that special county meeting. Does anyone have any comments or insights? Anne?
just an interesting a comment that I heard the other day, that that particular meeting was actually watched by council members from other municipalities with great interest. So I thought that was an interesting thing to hear.
Seems Georgian Bluffs is on the radar on a number of different issues these days. What do they say in the media world? Any headline is a good headline. Danuta, you also had your hand up.
Personally, I was perhaps not surprised, but disappointed at the resounding silence when we looked for feedback or questions or whatever, and I couldn't read it. I couldn't tell whether it was because people didn't know where to start or didn't want to raise anything. But in any case, that's where I was somewhat disappointed in the participation level.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. There did seem to be much silence. I don't know if there were any questions, or relatively few if there were. I think it's an overwhelming topic, and I think my perception is that there are still a lot of myths and misconceptions that need to be overcome and addressed. And I think that's going to be an ongoing process as we move forward. I would say one comment that was made suggested that there may be some backlash from the community regarding this movement. And that surprised me because as a councillor, I certainly haven't heard any backlash. So I don't know if I'm just not in the loop or if others have heard that could be a challenge. I wonder if anyone has anything to add there. John.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Kathy. I was also going to comment on that. Mayor Burley brought that up in terms of the kind of pushback, and at least it's on his radar. Councillor Barfoot, she talked about the wind turbines and saying, oh my goodness, are we going to have to go down that turbine path again? And I just want to share with people, like I've been talking publicly about climate change since 2014. I've almost lost track of the talks I've given, and it's mostly been in Grey and Bruce counties. And there's always pushback. In the audience, there are always people that either don't accept or understand this science of climate change, or they don't accept that we need to do anything about it, even if they accept climate change. And one of the things that I did during the last federal election, I was contacted by one of the candidates who was out on the hustings and receiving all these questions about climate change, because that his party was promoting climate change as part of their platform, election platform. And so I worked with him and his director of communications. And so I have a pretty good sense of the kind of questions that politicians are going to get. There's a category of these that are generic and they can be addressed quite easily. And then there's another category that are very specific to our region here. And so if we could find a way of sort of having these conversations with council that would start to address some of the questions that they're probably hearing already, or they probably will hear, I think it would really help prepare for going forward. I just don't know how to do that. I don't know how to engage in that kind of process, but I've got a lot of this material already worked up, and I'm sure the questions aren't much different now than they were back in 2019.
I would suggest as a counselor, and often I feel overwhelmed by the volume of information that we have to read. And I can honestly say that as far as climate change is concerned, I still have a lot to learn. I mean, you should have seen me trying to read about this new hydrogen energy-based project in Bruce County and trying to understand the physics and the molecules. It's been a long time since I've taken physics and chemistry. And so I can appreciate how other folks on council must be feeling. And I think there's a hesitancy to speak up because they don't want to sound foolish. None of us wants to sound foolish. And so I wonder if we could consider a frequently asked questions sheet, just maybe a 2-pager, something very simple to address those kinds of questions that you're referring to, John, when you do presentations that are generic but also specific to our region. And it's also something then that council can read at their leisure, if there is such a thing these days, rather than people missing meetings or coming in late to meetings and missing some of the meat of the matter. I wonder if as a committee we might want to consider that. How do the rest of you feel about that kind of approach? Yeah. So I feel like I've just given you homework, John, and I haven't even asked if you have time or the inclination or willingness to draft something for us.
Yeah, it's actually, I have all these notes. It's just a matter of me collating them and putting them together in a fashion. When I was working with the communications director, Bruce Cheadle, he would take my stuff, which tends to be a bit scientific, and translate it into general speak. So if there was one of us that I could work with that helped translate what I would provide, which is typically factual information, into something that's just a little bit more digestible, that would really help. But I can certainly provide the core content.
That would be excellent. And I see several hands up. I'll go to Bob. I think you had your hand up first.
Right. Yeah, John, I'd be glad to help with that. I spent 10 years in corporate communications at one point, so I'd be glad to help if that works. Last night there was a presentation put on by the National Observer out of Vancouver, and they were doing an interview with a professor from Simon Fraser University by the name of Mark Jacquard. And he's an economist, and he's come out with a book recently called The Citizen's Guide to Climate Success, and he deals with the 10 biggest myths about climate change. So I'd be glad to get a hold of a copy of that book, and then we'll feed that into your ideas there, John, if that works. Okay, good.
That sounds great. And yeah, super. I think John's kind of hit the nail on the head that the answers are there, and there are a lot of technicalities and jargon. I know one of my jobs at the health unit was to be the editor, to make submissions readable for people in our area according to literacy levels, and so the information is key, but how you word it so that people can read it and process it and understand it is every bit as important, I think, perhaps even more. Other hands were up and now I've forgotten. Luke.
Yeah, I just want to share that one of the members of the climate action teams also took the initiative to personally phone some of the councillors, and the debrief we've received is that these discussions were actually very, very constructive, very helpful, and also yielded these questions that were expected during the meeting a few weeks ago. And then, like you say, it's maybe a little bit too public. Whereas if we provide a safe space to basically put them on the table and say, this is what I'm worried about, then it also provides a more informal way to demystify some of these misunderstandings. And I just want to report that back so that there is, it was outside of this committee, but it was apparently quite a useful exercise. So that's something in terms of communication. I mean, do we do it verbally? Do we do it frequently asked questions? I guess the approach needs to be multi-pronged, and I was very pleased to hear that at least there's a connection, and let's put the issues on the table and let's talk about it.
Yeah, no, that's really good feedback. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe on the bottom of the FAQ sheet, or when we send it out, if we send it out, there can be an invitation to contact a number of people with contact information to have a one-on-one discussion, so that we are hitting both of those strategies that you refer to, Luke. Other comments or remarks, Anne?
just to follow up on what you said about the contacts, I think it would actually be really good if you've got questions about specific issues. Some of us are going to know more about one specific issue than another. So to actually kind of say, if you're interested in windmills, call this person and have that conversation. Don't call Anne. Yeah, so be really, really specific so that they're not having to do a whole bunch of phone calls to try to get the right person. Just to let you know, Kathy, that we actually have a Georgian Bluffs expert on hydrogen who lives here and is working on that Bruce project and has really, really good information if you'd like to talk to him. Before I forget, I just wanted to thank Al and Brittany because I thought, yes, there were not a lot of questions at the council meeting, but I thought the two of you did a really good job presenting. And I think sometimes it's hard to present when you're presenting to what feels a bit like a vacuum, but you pulled it off. So thank you for that.
For sure, yes. Thank you. Other comments, suggestions? Al?
The only thing I would like to add is, I wouldn't say we should be disappointed with the level of sort of question or the lack of questions that we had. I think my experience tells me that when you're introducing new topics, people need some time to absorb. People need some time to sort of get a better feel of things. And I think the approach we're taking in terms of constantly over communicating, giving everyone the opportunity to ask questions and answers, that over time people will gradually adapt and adopt what we're trying to move the organization and the community forward with. So I wouldn't be discouraged in any way, shape, or form. I think this is part of the process when you're introducing something new, something that's different. There's a bit of a lag time in terms of the adoption and getting on that bus willingly. But I think if we can demonstrate our successes over time, it will be a natural where everyone will get on board. So I think if we continue to push, continue to educate, continue to communicate, things will you'll get further adoption and you'll get more people behind this initiative and fully support it. So I would encourage you to continue the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. And I think it is a process and it can feel like a slow process, but it needs to happen that way in order for people to get to a certain point. To your previous remark, Al, about low-hanging fruit, just by way of example, I sat down with a couple of years ago with our former CAO and another staff member and talked about getting rid of single-use plastics. Every time I walked into our kitchen at the municipal office, I'd see great cases of plastic bottled water, and that was disturbing to me. And so I talked to them about at least a small step in the right direction in getting rid of single-use plastics in our municipal buildings, including our hockey arenas. I understand there are contracts with different companies that have the pop machines, but something so little as thinking about those contracts when they come up for renewal and how we might want to change how we do business in that small way. And I think that gives council something that they can wrap their head around. It's small, and in the whole grand scheme of things, I don't know if it's going to make a great big difference to climate change, but at least it demonstrates something that we can do in our own house, role modeling others going forward. Yeah, Sue.
Thank you. Just on that line, when you're saying about the single use, Shallow Lake Arena actually has a water refill station put in there. So the municipality has been doing little things like that over time. I think that one was actually supported by Shallow Lake Minor Hockey, that they put money towards that. So we have been working on little things. Those will eventually all add up to be one big thing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I'm not seeing any more comments at this point in time. So if it's okay with this committee, we'll move on to Anne's agenda item that's been added, and that has to do with the possibility of hosting a webinar on Lyme disease and how that relates to climate change. So the floor is yours, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and members. So Georgian Bluffs Climate Action Team, one of the things that we've been working on is to really increase awareness about climate change in our community. And one of the things that's happening is that with climate change, the deer ticks that carry Lyme disease are moving further north, and it's becoming a bigger issue for us. Bob Gray heard a speaker, her name is Dr. Anne Ewings, speak on on Lyme disease, but also the climate change connection. And he made contact with Anne to see whether she would consider doing a presentation for our group. And she has agreed, and we are booked for May the 17th, and we've got all of the poster and everything ready to roll, and then discovered that the Zoom link that we've been using will not allow us to have more than 100 participants. So we're looking for another option. Didn't know whether this would be something that Georgian Bluffs would be interested in working with. And whether the team that you're using, Brittany, allows for a webinar, which I think creates kind of a larger capacity. So I guess it's two questions. One, is it something that this committee and Georgian Bluffs would be interested in partnering on? And does the team package that you have allow for a webinar usage?
Thank you, Anne. I see Brittany has her hand up, so over to you, Brittany.
Thank you. So just to speak to the technology side of it, the Teams platform that we do use for these meetings has a feature called Teams Live, which does broadcast to, hundreds of thousands of participants it can accommodate. So technology-wise, we do have the ability to do what you're asking, just to inform the discussion.
Thanks, Brittany. Who would have known our clerk would, in 1 year, become an IT expert as well? The multi-talented Brittany Drury. I wonder if, is there a process that we need to go through? Is there any vetting of the speaker that the municipality would do ahead of time? Or how do you see that ask going forward? Does it need to go to council? Al, I wonder if you could comment for us.
It's an interesting question. I think between Brittany and myself, we'd have to sort of put our heads together. It's I don't see why we wouldn't be able to utilize our technology. We just need to be careful in terms of attaching our names to someone or something as well. But I think Brittany and I could put our heads around that, and we can send some communication.
Bob?
Yeah, I could give a little bit of background here on the speaker. With COVID, all these in-person meetings have been canceled right across the province. The Maple Syrup Producers Association of Ontario has 11 different locals. We represent the Grey Bruce local, but people have been having their meetings virtually. I noticed the Quinte local, which is down around the Belleville area, had a virtual meeting. And the one thing about virtual meetings is they're not nearly as good as being in person, but at least you can get yourself an invitation and just sit in your living room and listen in. So I saw this presentation on Lyme disease. We have a granddaughter that was living in Powassan, right beside one of the largest maple syrup producers in Ontario, Dave Matthews, and she picked up something. We think it was neutropenia, but now we're thinking it was Lyme disease. And it's very, very complicated. It's a nasty thing. You don't want it. Anyways, when I saw this presentation about Lyme disease, it's Dr. Anne Ewing, who is a medical doctor in the UK, who, after listening to her presentation, she had a great slide deck and she's well into it. And she has suffered from Lyme disease herself for 25 years and actually diagnosed herself with Lyme disease. And she's focused on Lyme disease in her retirement. This is her raison d'etre is to educate people in terms of Lyme disease and how important it is. And we've been kind of dropping the ball in the medical community here in Canada with the importance of Lyme disease. And in fact, it's here now. It's not something that's coming. It's here. And I think it's just a very important message. And I was very impressed with her presentation. I had my son and daughter-in-law who have done extensive research into neutropenia, and I've done multiple trips down to Sick Kids Hospital with this little girl. And she was spot on in everything related to Lyme disease. You know, veterinarians know more about Lyme disease than medical people in Canada. So it was very, very interesting. And anybody that works in the bush or is out hiking, enjoying the outdoors, I think they need to be aware of how important it is to watch out for these things. And she understands the ecology of these critters. She understands why they're moving north, and she understands the important and the effects of this disease. She equates it to, you probably don't want to hear this, but syphilis. Syphilis is a nasty disease that's been around for a long time. It's called the Great Imposter. You think you've got it under control, and then it pops up in a totally different symptom somewhere else in your body, and that's what Lyme disease is. So it's complicated, and I think it's important for people to hear this message. She's a very, very caring person. I think she's in her early 70s, but she just is very, very knowledgeable in this, and I just thought it was a message that people should probably hear if they have the opportunity. So that's it.
Thank you, Bob. Can you spell her last name for us?
Yes, it's a little different. It's Uings.
Okay, thank you.
Doctor, she's a medical doctor, not practicing now, but Dr. Ann Ewings, and she lives in Picton, Ontario. She started a support group for Lyme disease in the Picton and the Quinte region down there, and you could Google that. I don't have the exact name of that group right now. Maybe Ann does, but it's the Bay of Quinte Lyme Support Group or something like that.
Okay, thank you. The other resource we have on Lyme disease locally is the public health unit. They do active surveillance for those ticks, as far as I'm aware, annually, and have been doing so for a number of years. And the communicable disease department there also takes phone calls and follows up on that particular disease. So I think we do have some local voices that that can act as a resource as well. Not that it has anything to do with the presentation that you're recommending, but yeah, Anne.
I think actually, Kathy, it would be really good for us to share that information on the evening of the presentation, so that, because I know that if, like, for example, if your pet has a tick, they recommend taking it in to be tested and that kind of stuff. So I think that would be good information to have as part of the evening.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was part of that program that investigated potential cases of Lyme disease. So, even just little things like, how do you remove the tick from your skin? What kind of clothing do you wear when you're walking through grassy areas? How do you transport the tick to public health, like putting it in a container with a dampened cotton ball? Just really practical things like that I think it's useful for people to know. Sue.
Thank you. I'd just like to say I'm totally in favor of us going ahead and doing something to help with this, because 9 years ago, Terry had the bullseye rash and a tick that had burrowed right into the back of his leg. And we were told by our family doctor that nope, Lyme's disease didn't exist. It was all in his head and he would just have to get over it. And we just found alternative herbal treatments that we could do that helped him get through that. And he eventually somewhat recovered, but that was a long, hard road when you didn't have any medical support at all. And we're in fact told that it didn't exist. And at the same time, a cousin of mine had it, and she was in Toronto, and she had to go to the States for treatment. She couldn't get treatment up here. So it's
Yeah.
time that it really got brought to the forefront and let people know what's really going on.
I would just, I guess my comment is, and having worked in that program, is this is a very difficult disease to diagnose. It's not so simple. There's also a bit of a movement in the States that actually, because the medical system in the States is profit driven, some doctors just do Lyme disease, and a lot of Canadians go there. They get told they're suffering from chronic Lyme disease symptoms, and they're put on long-term low-dose antibiotic treatment, which then contributes to antibiotic resistant organisms and is not typically recommended. So when I said vetting, I'm not meaning to suggest that this speaker isn't it isn't based in evidence, but we do need to be really careful with this subject because there is a lot of misinformation. And there are some physicians outside of our borders who are looking, I think, to make some money from this and might be doing some harm instead in these low dose chronic treatments of these diseases. So that's why I said earlier, I think, we need to be really careful as a municipality that we're sure that the information that's being presented isn't contrary to, for example, what our health unit might be proposing. And I only say that because I dealt with so many of these phone calls as a public health nurse that it was, it's a sticky wicket is all I'm trying to say. Bob?
Yeah, I agree with you, Kathy. I think it is a sticky wicket. I have the contact information for this lady, phone number and address and all that stuff, and I'm sure she'd be glad to talk with someone like you. And I think it is important for you to vent the speaker so that you're happy. But, her message is basically prevention. And it's not panic or anything. It's just basic, straight information, straight up information, but related to climate change. In fact, there's a lot of ecological factors, moving that thing forward based on climate. And I just thought that she was really good. And I hope, if you had time, it would be great if you could touch base with her and kind of get a feel for what's going on there.
Thank you. I think I would say that I'm not, I wasn't an expert when I was in that program on Lyme disease, and I'm certainly not now, almost 10 years later. So I think, I would circle back to our health unit and ask, are they, how do they perceive this? Perhaps the specialist, if they're aware of her and her messages. I'm just trying to be aware of the municipality supporting this, and are we supporting the message, or are we just supporting the IT platform? And maybe it's both. In terms of what you described, Bob, it likely very well is both, but I don't know that I'm qualified enough to vet that kind of a speaker and their message. So I guess these are things, Al and Brittany, that you will want to take some time to think about. And how soon will the group, Bob's group, how soon will you need to know whether we can support that platform? Anne?
So the presentation that we have arranged is for May the 17th. So we had been hoping on starting to, we haven't distributed anything at this point, but we're certainly hoping at looking at possibly next week. I've just actually received an email from Lee, because I sent an email to him. I just found out that we couldn't go over 100 last night from Lee. So sorry about the short notice. I emailed him saying, can we bump up our package for just a month? And the answer is yes. So I don't want to feel like we're pressuring you to do anything. We do have another option. So if it's not feeling comfortable, we can go ahead and use the option we had, or that we just received.
Okay. But the ask is still in place, and we would still ask Brittany and Al to look into this then, Anne, is that?
Well, I'm going to actually, I think what I'm going to suggest is, could we open that up to the group to say, would this be an interesting option to partner on, or should we just continue on the Georgian Bluffs Climate Action Team pathway? So, yeah, we can go either way at this point. When I got the email kind of towards midnight last night, I didn't think I had the other option, but yeah. So can I just say some more? Because I know that the whole issue of Lyme disease and diagnosis is a sticky wicket. I also know that sometimes grassroots movements and kind of that citizen science and all of that is sometimes what pushes kind of a larger medical system to recognize that there are concerns. And so I don't know whether this is one of them. I do know that Lyme disease is becoming a bigger issue, and that the deer ticks are becoming a bigger issue in this community. So the need to raise awareness around that, I think, is important. And I do know that that's connected to climate change. So all of those messages are important messages to get out.
Agreed. Yeah. Yep. Especially the prevention piece for sure. And it's timely with the spring weather and with COVID and more people wanting to spend time outdoors in wooded areas for sure. I agree. Brittany.
So I'm just working through how to best tackle this with respect to your timelines, Anne, because I do know you said that was scheduled for May 17th, correct? So in accommodating that month timeline and working this through in my mind, what I'm thinking is if the Climate Action Committee, being this committee, is generally supportive of working with the general team in Georgian Bluffs, then Al and I can take this away, do the appropriate vetting, ensure that our technology will host exactly what this event will look like, and then we could potentially meet again in a week to go over those options and make a final decision. So that way, Anne, should it be that the township cannot partner with this event, you still have a month to make the appropriate arrangements.
Does that make sense? Thank you, Brittany, for putting that in clear and practical terms for us. That's exactly what we needed, I think. So that if it's okay with the committee, that's how we'll move forward with this, with that time frame. Does that sound okay to you, Anne? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
That sounds fine. And we've just received a phone call here saying that Bob Gray somehow lost his connection and can't get back in.
Oh,
so sorry.
Oh, thank you for noticing that.
Yeah.
I wonder if he could phone in, if that's possible. Is he indicating that he would like to come back in? We're just about at the end of our agenda anyway, but certainly we'll accommodate that.
I did just re-forward all of the meeting invitation information to Bob for his information.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, my guess is if he doesn't have any internet connectivity, he won't get that email. Yeah.
He did get the email, but he said,
Oh.
don't worry, he's going to try, and we'll see.
Okay, excellent. So should we wait a second or two, Anne, to see if he can reconnect?
What's left on the agenda, Kathy? Because if there's not much, I think we could just proceed.
As far as I'm aware, unless there are other issues, I believe it's just deciding on the date of our next meeting. So why don't we go ahead with that, and hopefully Bob will join us in the meantime. And Brittany, do you have some recommendations for dates for our next meeting?
So in considering the partnering idea with the TIC webinar, then we would have to meet next Friday. So just to hammer out those details. So depending on everyone's schedules, it seems like 10 a.m. relatively works. I don't envision it being a very long meeting. It would just be called to discuss if we are partnering, and if so, then to pass a motion to that effect and hammer out the details. So at this point, I would recommend we just host or we schedule that meeting, and then we can get into further scheduling next week.
So that is Friday, April the 16th at 10 a.m., Brittany? How does that suit with everyone else's schedule? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let's go with that then as a short meeting, and then from there we can talk about our next regular meeting. Any other questions or final comments before we adjourn? And do I have someone to move that we adjourn and second that? Anne and Danuta, all in favor? Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you.
Have a good